Is this a good impression of how Andy usually starts these streams? Hello, everyone. Hi, hello. If you can see me, if you can hear me, please do give me a heads up. Obviously, tonight's going to be a little different, and by a little, I mean a lot. I am without my better half. As you all probably have figured out or seen in the announcement, ragweed season just started. I got an alert from my doctor that was like, ragweed! But unfortunately, Andy is not feeling well today. Clan Pestilence heard that I was in a big fight with Nurgle, and I think decided to try and take advantage of the situation and to undermine the Lorebeards premises. But fortunately for us, we have had Andy saved the day, but at great cost. So he is ill for today, which kind of worked out okay, because we have to ultimately we need to get together and like plan out the next few weeks, as we realized yesterday that we had not really scheduled anything for today. And then Andy started not feeling well, so it was like, it's all right. So for today, we are going to do an AMA. Andy has done a good number of these because, unlike me, he's really good about if we say we're going to do a stream at the usual time and I'm not available, he'll be like, oh, well, I'll go do something. Whereas my default has usually been something like, oh, I can take my dog out and go do something else then. But I figured for tonight, it would be good for me to come on for an hour or two. We won't do like the full 3 hours more than likely, because I can't imagine y'all will have 3 hours worth of questions. But this is a true kind of AMA thing. So under kind of the Lorebeards brand. So if you happen to have any questions, I wonder, can I make myself smaller, or do I just take up the whole screen? That's all there is to it. Nope. Whatever, it's fine. But if y'all have any questions about Lorebeards or Warhammer Fantasy or whatever it might be, feel free to fire them off. Of course, I'll be doing the standard thing of, if they're in the form of super chats or bits, I'll prioritize those. But I can't imagine we're going to be crazy busy tonight. I mean, imagine this is going to be a pretty chill stream. So I'll just answer the ones that I can, and we'll go from there. So let's get into it. Grim Isaac, 3-part Warhammer 40K. Is this like, I don't know if, okay, 3-part question. Maybe an in-universe reason for only male space marines is that since female genetics are much more stable, it's harder to use them to mass produce super soldiers with such a slipshod method. Because custodies are handcrafted, it allows for females, and space marines are on assembly lines, not allowing the attention needed for female space marines. Sure. I mean, that is an answer I could go, yeah, sure, why not? Because it's actually like an intended answer. It's like it that's like that's weird sciencey bullshit, and here's a weird sciencey bullshit answer that I think would work fine for it. And it's not like, oh, it's based on genetics, which is enough of a real world thing that we look at it and we go, well, no, that's not how that works. So it's like they should use magic science to explain a magic science thing instead of trying to use real world science that's wrong to explain a magic science thing. So I think that would be the best way to do it. All right, I'm gonna grab a couple of these other ones that I saw real fast early. Andy, you look a little different. Yes. Yep. This is what the recent illness did to me. I got fatter and younger simultaneously. Ascended Overlord. Have I played Fire Emblem Three Houses? Yes, I fucking love the Fire Emblem games. I love Fire Emblem games so much. They were like, I think the first ever real strategy games I played growing up. What are your thoughts on Cress? Is there a lore equivalent in Warhammer? Probably the closest thing to the Cress in Three Houses, and like the Cress in like Fire Emblem Awakening and stuff would probably be like Marks of Chaos. So like when a god marks someone with a physical thing on their body, that actually greatly empowers them. Because like a mark from a chaos god, like the mark of Khorne, the mark of Tzeentch, or much less talked about, but what are implied to be marks of Ulrich, marks of Sigmar, and such, do make those people significantly more powerful. Like significantly more powerful. So that would probably be the closest thing I can think of off the top of my head. It's not 1-to-1, but it's similar enough. Julius, Throg question. How clever are troll hags? They can cast Lore of Death. They must be somewhat intelligent. It's enough for Throg to accept them as a little more than equal. So, Giant River Troll Hags are a type of shaman, which means that the use and casting of magic is innate to them, but it also means that, and so it's not that they're like studious learners of magic. It's more that they live in areas that are deeply saturated with magic, and the magic is sort of almost like a natural expression to them, as opposed to something they like meticulously study. That being said, Giant River Troll Hags, by troll standards, are geniuses. They're capable of speech. They are much more capable of intelligence, but they are still trolls, and they do still suffer from stupidity. So they are still very, very, very dumb. Throg is an incredibly eloquent speaker that knows how to read. He is educated, and he longs for someone that has his level of intelligence. I don't think that he would find a Giant River Troll Hag by any stretch of the imagination to be a engaging partner. I could see that maybe he has, as funny as this might sound, I could see that he might have like a preferred partner or like a harem of Giant River Troll Hags that exist as allowing him to like vent his frustrations, and get that, those carnal desires out of there. But that's not something, Games Workshop doesn't really like talking about the sexuality of their characters. So it's hard to say whether or not that's something that Throg would desire or feel. But if you were making him like a fully based character, I think that would actually probably be an interesting struggle for him, would be that he would desire to have a partner. He's still a troll. He's not a man that turned into a troll. He's a troll that became very intelligent. So I would imagine there would very much be a part of him that still desires to have a partner. But the question would be like, but he would probably be very frustrated by it. And that would probably be just another thing that adds to his list of grievances about why he's so angry and he's so determined to tear down civilization, try and raise up monster kind into a kingdom of monsters. I think that would be like kind of another big thing, is that he would have these female trolls that he has around him because he is a king. I would imagine, actually, one thing I would say, I would bet that Throg would have tried very, very hard, genuinely, to have sons and daughters that are as intelligent as he is. I bet you, if you were writing Throg out well, in my opinion, I think he would have tried feverishly to mate with as many different, like, Giant River Troll Hags, especially because they're more intelligent than more trolls. They can use magic. And his hope would probably be that his intelligence would be genetic. So if he has children, it would pass down to them, only for him to discover that's not how it works. That the Chaos Gods in their cruelty have made it where it's only him and he's completely alone. So imagining that he has children and he has to wait for them to come to enough of an age where he can test their intelligence, and he gets beyond furious every single time he discovers that his child is just as dumb as other trolls. I think there would be a deep, deep, deep tragedy in that. and that a significant amount of his horde aren't just trolls that are drawn to him, but his own children. That he might, like, a part of him cares about them because they're his, but at the same time, they're all disappointments, which might cause him even more internal conflict because, like, he knows he very well might think that's a fucked up way to think about them, but it depends on how human you want to make him. But yeah. Dynaman, I know the Warhammer maps are often inconsistent, but this error seems particularly egregious. Why do some maps have the Lost Realm of Strigos with Morcane all the way to the north of the Marshes of Madness? Because it teleported. Because it teleports. Sometimes people just get the locations wrong. Morcane should be on a river, or very near a river. Because human civilizations build near water features, and if you're going to have humans in the Badlands, they would not be able to survive without being near rivers. And B, the whole main foundation of Morcane as a city comes from he founded the city where he found the crown of sorcery in the hands of Alcadazar when Alcadazar's corpse washed up out of the river. So yeah, it's definitely a unfortunate mistake. Sprite Apple, any tips on how to fix the Savage Orc lore? Okay, so what I would say to this is that I would lean much more into, I would look up the Bone Splitters lore from Age of Sigmar and basically transpose it from Age of Sigmar into fantasy. I have complex feelings about the Savage Orcs because I think that greenskins as a species are an extremely viable group where you can explore the term savagery, and like savages as its textbook definition, and they are able to fulfill it without standing in as like this uncomfortably racist analog to groups that were outside traditional civilizations, Western civilizations. So, but if you look at the Bone Splitters lore, what they did, I thought, was a very clever way to handle it, where they basically express the concept that there are greenskins that have a extremely traditionalist attitude towards lifestyle, that they live in emulation of Gork and Mork. And Gork and Mork are always portrayed as these like mostly naked giant twin gods that are like beating the tar out of each other and constantly fighting, but they don't use advanced weaponry. They're not said to use they're not said to use metal. They stick to using things like their fists or bone or kind of like the natural hide and like the natural things that greenskins always dealt with before greenskins, orcs in particular, started like becoming more scavengers, because the vast majority of their equipment comes from stealing other people's stuff. Until you had the big Black Orc Rebellion, which led to greenskins or orc smiths escaping from Minglzar Nagrund and out to the wider world, and then greenskins, the concept of smithing and metallurgy spread. So what I would really recommend doing is exploring that the Savage Orcs, instead of it being that they are like that they're just like, oh, they're these idiot savages that are foaming at the mouth, blah, blah, blah. Instead, exploring that they are a deeply committed culture to like the old ways. That they heavily reject what they see as betrayals of the way things were, and that there is a deep strength, that the Wa is at its absolute strongest and most prime for orcs, not people, orcs, that follow the traditional ways and emulate their gods properly. That for them, the power that they gain from hunting down great, powerful monsters and cracking open the bones and being able to give offerings and follow in the wake of Gork and Mork, that they have tangible proof of this with their tattoos, in that their tattoos do give them literally magical barriers that protect them from things. That when magic is hurled against them, they have a much better chance of like resisting it than other groups of greenskins. And for them, it's that their gods are literally protecting them. That the Wa energy around Savage Orcs is so much stronger. It's so much more heady and tangible than it is around regular orcs. That they are more easily able to manifest the psychic magical abilities of the Wa, that they're much more easily able to get rogue idols to rise up and join them. So I would lean much more into showing tangible proof of why the Savage Orcs, that their savagery is core to their identity. That it's that Gork and Mork are brutal gods, horribly brutal gods, and that they are, from the Savage Orcs' perspective, they are much more impressed, and I don't need headphones, I don't know why I'm wearing these. They are much more impressed by the brutality of the Savage Orcs than they are by the weakling other types of orcs that hide behind metal and armor, because that's not the way to be a true greenskin. That's the coward's way. Those orcs care too much about survival. They're missing out on the brutality. You could kind of have an interesting thing where a lot of the times people think of like black orcs as being like, oh, those are the gorkiest orcs because they're like big heavy metal and all this other stuff. But you could have kind of an interesting idea that the Savage Orcs argue they're the gorkiest orcs because they don't hide. They don't use the coward's way, and instead rely only on their muscle and their raw strength and their ability to have faith in Gork and Mork to protect them as they charge into battle against the weak stunties and the flimsy umis and all that stuff. And that the black orcs and such are actually more counter to what we would usually think are almost more morky orcs, in that they're more cunning because they use protection and armor and shields, and like they have all this stuff to keep themselves alive so that they can get to the battle line and cut people up. So I would explore it through that angle. Make it like an interesting cultural divide that your players have the ability to witness. Show how the Savage Orcs get into combat against other forms of greenskins, and how there are spats, where if you see like a Savage Orc tribe passing through an area, as well as like a regular greenskin tribe, and they like kill some great knight, some of the orcs come over and they start trying to pull pieces of armor off the knight and steal his magic items and everything. And then the Savage Orcs come over and start attacking them because they see that as a form of weakness that needs to be expunged. You can play around with it. Brock 6000. I asked Andy this too. What unique aspect of Beastman culture? Oh, what is a unique aspect of Beastman culture which can be teased out to make them more developed? Andy's being the babies left in the woods. I think for me, probably the one for me that I wouldn't want to pick the same answer, so I'll pick a different answer. I would probably want to have a bigger development on how Beastmen herd paths actually work. So like we know that Beastmen have herdstones, and the herdstones are like gathering places where a singular herd, or more often large amounts of war herds, will gather together for great rituals and all the other stuff. But it's also implied that these are locations where they have like their great ruts, where there's frankly a lot of fucking and fighting, and a lot of breeding and stuff. But the herds don't spend most of their time at the herdstones. It's often implied they only visit like maybe once every few months, or once a year, or once every few years, or only when like major events go down. So something that I think would be interesting to explore would be, what pathways are the herds taking? Like, do they follow natural like migratory paths where there's like a particular circuitous route that they take that always brings them back to the herdstone? And so most of the time they just travel around following these, because you know how it's like the concept of if you're ever out in the forest, or you're doing hunting or tracking in real life, following the paths that animals naturally create for themselves is a core component of tracking animals. And I think if you were going to explore the idea of making beastman culture actually interesting, I think it'd be fun to explore, well, what do the beastmen do when they're not attacking someone or at a herdstone? Because that's like the remaining like 85% of their time. It's often implied that they are very nomadic, to the point that they don't have any, they don't have forms of settlements traditionally. So what I would want to explore is, where do they go? Why do they go the route that they do go? Is it, do they only follow ancestral paths? Do some bray herds prefer to constantly create new paths? Do they follow the migratory paths of certain other beasts because they have to eat? There's a ton of them, and a lot of them are massive and would require a pretty considerable amount of meat and calories in order to keep themselves going. Where do the centaurs get all their damn beer from? Because centaurs are supposed to be constantly drunk. I think I would invest heavily into exploring the actual culture of the beastmen when they're not fighting and they're not at a herdstone. Where do they go for supplies? Where do they go to when they're going along those paths? What happens when they cross paths with other beastmen? What happens when they are like, do they have certain unique sites that they stop at to rest at? Do they focus on trying to only attack particular areas? So I would just want to explore their lives a bit. I will say I would also really want to explore centaurs and minotaurs a bit more, because they're their own unique species. They're not traditional beastmen. Minotaurs are a stable species, and centaurs are a stable species. So I would also be quite interested in exploring them a good bit more, and what they are like outside of warfare. Like, we know minotaurs are often found being guardians of sacred sites to the dark gods and herdstones, and like the great piles of offerings that are put to the dark gods, which often are made out of weapons and armor that can then be given to chaos champions or the beastmen use to equip themselves. So like, why do the minotaurs have this guardianship role, and what's the history there? Do they guard other places as well? And it seems to typically be more of like a unique thing, but yeah, I'd explore that. Zictiv, I know you've probably been asked a billion times already, what do I think about the new Chaos Marauders? They're gorgeous. They are absolutely gorgeous. And for me, this is probably the most exciting reveal for the old world so far, because it's the first time that they've given us some refreshed units for a mini they already had for the old ones. Or for the old ones, for old Warhammer. Like, if their goal was to say, okay, we're not going to refresh the ranges, we're just going to use old Warhammer fantasy kits, and you just got to deal with it, which I personally hate, but I understand why they did it first. Here they just were like, hey, look, here's a refreshed set of units that have like fantastic customization options. Even though there's an old hammer kit for it, and there's AOS kits that work well for Marauders as well. For me, it's really exciting because this shows, in my opinion, that they're starting to if they could just do this every once in a while, that'd be great. Because like, it's one thing when it's like, oh, here's a new unit, or here's like the army book, but the fact that we're just getting Chaos Marauders with just like a campaign supplement instead of just like a character, very exciting. It makes me very hopeful that GW is about to start actually investing a bit into their setting, instead of just kind of taking the not so active route. From Eggman, what would be the consequences if a human popped up in Lothern or Altdorf that could passively banish / kill greater demons? The consequences would probably be pretty realistically in the Warhammer world. That guy would, if he popped up in Altdorf, he would probably be killed really fast. There is a ridiculous amount of chaos cults in Altdorf and the Empire in general. The enemy within is massive within the Empire, and the second that there was a human that could kill, like permakill demons, I think it would be far more likely that he would be assassinated than anything else. Lothern would be a bit of a unique instance. I think in Lothern, if that happened, he would probably be captured and studied. The High Elves don't really... A lot of High Elves don't consider humans to be like equivalent to them by any stretch of the imagination. So I think most likely he would be captured and studied, basically enslaved, and he would either be used as some kind of weapon, or they would basically like try to find a way to dissect him and see if they could replicate him. I don't think it would be good for him no matter where he ended up, basically. Not to play. What would Quick Headtaker's Tinder profile look like? So, honestly, I feel like Queek. You know what his profile would look like? Quick Headtaker's profile would definitely be that when you're like scrolling through his pictures, they would all be pictures of him posing with the decapitated head of his exes. Like every picture would be a different ex, and Queek would have quotations from all of his exes that would talk about how great he is, like how he's such a... It would literally all just be stuff where it's like, it would be Queek putting quotation marks and the person that's dead saying like what a generous lover he is, how amazing he is, how handsome, how fantastic. Like it would just be saying how he's the best thing ever, while he's also like preening in each picture, like showing off his sleek fur and his musculature and all of his slaves that have had their tongues cut out so they can't talk. And there'd probably be like in his bio would be, next to all those quotes, would be Queek talking about how he is the best thing ever, and that anyone who has the chance to be Queek's lover is beyond, should be beyond grateful because they have been so blessed by the Great Horned Rat to have the best partner to ever exist. He would basically just talk himself up. Because Queek is obsessive about himself to a ridiculous extent. And he's also really aggressive. One of the big things about Queek is that he doesn't really like to play games. And he's very blunt, but in kind of a terrifying way. But the other thing that would be super creepy would be that if you would do your research about Queek's dating profile, all of his comments from his exes would probably include various details that he could only know if they told him. So like all the information that he's posting would seem extremely bizarrely biased, but it would also have a lot of nuggets of truth that would be deeply uncomfortable. because the whole thing that makes Queek very, very unique is that the heads that he takes are they tell him things that he cannot know otherwise. Like they reveal truths to him that they would never have shared with him willingly. And it's super weird. Like knowing Queek, each one of the heads would probably say something. Like they would talk about how Queek is so much better than their other partners and would give like an example of a prior partner and why they weren't as good as Queek. And the weird thing would be that it wouldn't just be like someone he made up. It would actually be real people and real flaws that they suffered from. Dynaman, do other types of trolls... Oh, do the other types of trolls have equivalent to Giant River troll hags that focus on different lores? Not that we know of, but they should. They should. As far as we are aware, there is currently nothing about like giant stone troll hags or giant regular troll hags or giant chaos troll hags, but they should exist. They should absolutely be a thing. I don't think that river trolls would be any more uniquely gifted to magic than them. I will say they would probably have lores that would surprise, because I most of them would probably take from like the lore of beasts, the lore of death, and I mean, you think the lore of life, but like if the Giant River Troll Hag doesn't have the lore of life, I have a hard time imagining a different troll having it. But because trolls just surround themselves with like great piles of like rotting bodies and pieces and stuff. But I think the idea that river trolls are the only trolls that have giant troll hags is absurd. I think it's completely absurd. So I would very much say, I would say that I think it is likely that only female trolls can swell to such a size and only they can use magic. That would make sense based on a lot of other species in the Warhammer world and how magic tends to work. And it would help give like a really unique sexual dimorphism to trolls. But I would absolutely try and play around with them having different lores, but death would probably be like their baseline lore, I would guess. Bruxton Southend. Oh yeah, I caught your old Carrick 8 Peaks map video. Yeah, that was a good video. I'm really proud of that video. I need to redo it at some point because the audio is like terrible, but I'm really, really proud of like the visuals and the information in that video. But thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Dynaman, headcanon. The reasons humans can perform miracles, fall to chaos more easily, and are more easily raised as undead are all connected. Their body/souls are much more malleable to magic and etheric influence than other species, which allows the influence of the gods to flow in from the ether directly rather than using the winds of magic. So, that is very possible, and I think a reasonable exploration. I would, interestingly enough, I would suggest that yes. Yeah, I would say basically the thing that seems to make humanity particularly unique is that they have a physical and spiritual weakness to etheric influence. When you consider the fact that like they're so much more prone to mutation than literally any other species on the face of the earth. And that they're that I think is very directly related. The undead part I think is not quite as strong. I would say that the undeath magic that we're familiar with working better on humans than others has more to do with the fact that it was made to work on humans. Nagash and his sorcery, he studied humans, he studied human souls, and he had thousands of years of Nehekaran mortuary cult information, which also specialized in life and death on humanity. if Nagash had dedicated just as much time and effort to other species, that necromancy would be just as effective on those other species, because there are undead elves and undead dwarfs and undead ogres, and like they're all out there. But the magic that's used nowadays by necromancers, vampires, etc., was the magic developed by Nagash, which was meant to work on humans. So if it's being used against another species, it kind of has to be adjusted. You have to make adjustments to what's called the corpse geometries. So you're kind of like translating what you're doing to work on somebody else, which is going to be more difficult. Dumbo, AOS questions. What separates the Dark Oath from regular followers of Chaos? Bonus question. Do any human tribes in places like Gur worship Gorkamorka? So, second one's easy. Are there humans that worship Gorkamorka? Yes. Absolutely. Not as many nowadays as there used to be. Gorkamorka was not originally, but for a time he was part of Sigmar's pantheon, and a lot of people, a good amount of people, especially in Gur, worshipped him as like the great breaker of monsters, the tamer of continents, the slayer of god beasts. He was a hotshot and a really big deal. But as the years have worn on and he started like fighting with himself, and he left the pantheon and he went on his great Wa, the Great Wa path, where he like smashed from one side of the mortal realms to the other, which took a really long time. His worship among humans has greatly degraded, because much of humanity has become like civilized. But there are still like isolated groups in certain parts of the realms that would still remember the old times or still worship him as an ancient deity that was terrifying, and would, be the kind to like make offerings and stuff to hopefully have it where they convince him to stay away from them, instead of like coming towards them, or to stomp and crush their enemies rather than stomp and crush them. For the Dark Oath, so the Dark Oath are from regular followers of Chaos. So regular followers of Chaos, the Dark Oath kind of, okay, so the Dark Oath peoples, what makes them unique in the form of what's known as Dark Oath is that they are people that take oaths. So they are often tribal peoples that are those that were abandoned by Sigmar, or when the Age of Chaos happened. So when the Age of Chaos came down, the Sigmar retreated with everybody that he could take, and retreated to Azir, and he sealed the gates. And it was kind of, if you didn't make it, you were basically the equivalent of the people during Noah's Ark who didn't get to go on the Ark, except for instead of water, it was, the horrors of chaos. And while there were many empires and folks that tried to fight and died, the vast majority of people chose survival over death. And those were really your only two options. And by choosing survival, they basically were damned, and became chaos worshippers, though a lot of them don't necessarily like chaos that much. It's more of they tend to have more of a history of they did what they needed to survive. And then when the Sigmarites returned, so when the gates of Azir were thrown open and everybody returned, they have a very deep bitterness and enmity towards the forces of order for abandoning them, for leaving them to suffer for 500 years and to, suffer through these horrible horrors where they had to commit unspeakable acts in order to live. And they took it really personally for understandable reasons. But the big thing about the Dark Oath as a culture is that the Dark Oaths, so they are these surviving tribes that have a really big axe to grind with the forces of order and Sigmar in particular, but they also take oaths. So what they basically do is that they are a culture that very much revolves around the concept of they will declare to the gods that there's something they're going to accomplish. So they'll claim that there's like a foe they're going to slay or a feat they're going to accomplish of some kind. And basically, their goal is to accomplish it at any cost. Because if they fail, if they succeed, the gods, which aren't necessarily the chaos gods, there are tons and tons and tons of minor powers within Age of Sigmar, just like there is in fantasy. So it might not be to the gods, the chaos gods that they're offering these oaths to, but it might be like minor powers as well. But if they're successful, it brings them great glory and often can also give them power and gifts. But if they fail, the punishments can be awful, including that if you look at their range for the Dark Oaths, there are like these big, horrible curse fiends. I think that's what they're called. But they're these big draconic chaos spawn looking creatures. And a lot of the time, those were people that made oaths and they failed. And they get horribly turned into these terrible, god-awful monsters. But that's why they're called Dark Oaths, is that oath culture is like one of the foundation stones of their peoples. Donovan, update on the Marshes of Madness thing from yesterday. Ashkal had a great idea of how to incorporate your salmon idea. Basically, the marshes are so fed and polluted, the shoalborn, the actual fish people of the project, have to return to the Dragonback Mountain Lakes to reproduce because otherwise their eggs won't survive. Shoalborn have slowly built up resistance as they grow up. Hey, that's great. All of that. Awesome. Very cool. Godric the Grafted, what end times fight do you want to see that didn't happen? I'd love to see Arbol fight and die to Krell instead of Caradryan. Honestly, for me, I think it would have mostly ended the same way, but I would have loved to have seen the one that everybody thinks happened that didn't, which was Kolek Suneater versus Cetra the Imperishable. Even though I wasn't a huge fan of that storyline of like what they kind of did with Cetra towards the end, it had some fun moments, but a lot of people think this is a thing that actually happened, and it didn't. The Wilder Fiends, thank you. And yeah, Living Legends, in the novel Dark Oaths, a hunter fails to kill an assassin, he's blinded because he didn't fulfill the oath that he vowed. There's very immediate and horrible punishments. So for me, Kolek Suneater versus Cetra would have been one that I wanted to see happen because it would have been cool and a lot of people wanted to see it. And there are certain authors that also wanted to put it in, notably Josh Reynolds, who wrote it on his blog, which that blog has caused so much mess because a lot of people were like, "Oh, this happened," and it's like, no, it's what Josh would have liked to have happened, but it wasn't actually like put in and published. Excuse me. It's Modelo time. What is why? I don't know what that rings a bell. But hey, how are you, Hammond? Man, who would be the best social media influencer from the Warhammer world, and who would be the most successful? I ask both because there are two different things. The first is someone who's popular that most people like. The other would be the ultimate grifter. The ultimate grifter would be the Changeling, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Like, not even a question. The Changeling would be the ultimate rage bait content creator, social media influencer, whatever you want to call it. He can literally turn into anybody he wants. Like, he would literally go out of his way to manufacture as much drama as possible. And he would be, he's basically like if AI was flawless and perfect, and he would be a nightmare. He would be an absolute nightmare. The best social media influencer as far as who is the most popular that most people like. Probably, honestly, it would probably be someone like, Rather controversially, it'd probably be someone like Marathi. Marathi would probably be like, she is very, very manipulative in a very clever way. And she's not like this outwardly, oh, she's so evil, I can't believe she's so evil person a lot of the time. Like, Warhammer obviously has to ham it up because it's like, oh, she's a dark elf, blah, blah, blah. But it would probably be Marathi because she's very, very good at telling people what they want to hear. And she's also got, she's got the horny posting. Like, she would be an expert at getting people to like her. And would basically just be like, oh, the hot goth MILF account. That I think she would have a lot stronger of an understanding of what people want to see, and having a very carefully crafted image of herself that would make a lot of people fanatically adore her. I think there's a lot of people who would be genuinely good people, but because they're genuinely good and they're like if you take like the Everqueen Alariel, for instance, Alariel, I think, is too true to herself rather than committing to manipulating people. So I think she would have various opinions and like strong thoughts on various things that would get her into fights. And people that would like go out of their way to try and tear her down because she represents something that threatens what they do. Yeah, that could be interesting. That's what I would think. Hammond, what would Catholic Scavendom look like? Basically Clan Pestilence. I mean, essentially, except for I think they would have like, I feel like they would have a unique disease that they worship as like the ultimate disease, and the whole concept behind the plague is that supposedly there was some like one of the Nurglitches, maybe the original Nurglitch, got a plague that caused him great horrible pain, and then he died, and then 3 days later the plague brought him back to life, and such is the glory and the glory of the great horned rat. And so like they're obsessively trying to recreate or find this plague that brings you immortal life. Yada yada yada. It would be basically Clan Pestilence, but you would take any like church themes and turn it up even higher. But they're already a deeply fanatical religious sect of the Skaven. So you would just basically give them more of like, I think if you gave them more of like a Christ-like figure that they obsess over, then you're basically there. You know, you have the whole thing of like, they find a slave in their horde who has like boils in the shape of Skaven Jesus's face, and they're like, oh my god, it's a sign. Flay his skin off so we could take it to the Plague Pontifex and show him. Oh no, you want them as full Jesus worshippers? Yeah, no, that wouldn't work. How many Skaven slaves can Marathi take? Probably all of them. I think most of them would die horribly just through like heart palpitations. Hammond, what was Wa Grimgor called in Cathay? The Great Wa of China? Get out. just get out. Donovan, hot take. Archon shouldn't be a Tomb King Lord on Tabletop or Total War. Instead, he should be the Lord of Nagash following Undead faction that incorporates all the other non-vampiric forms of Undead. Right now, it's kind of off that all the Undead are focused in two factions. One who hates Nagash Tomb Kings, and the other one is one form. The other one is one branch of one form of Undead Vampire Council. Well, you forgot the Vampire Coast in there too. But Archon's always been a little weird. Ultimately, from a lore standpoint, you're correct. But from a tabletop standpoint, Archon the Black has always been a Tomb King character. And that's just kind of all there is to it. And I actually disagree with your comment. And the reason I do is because the Tomb Kings are not a monolithic race that all hate Nagash. Nagash had many loyalists among the Tomb Kings. They're definitely a minority, but there are Tomb Kings, Tomb Princes, and Lich Priests of the Mortuary Cult that sided with Nagash. Nagash ruled over Khemri for a very long time, and there were many people in the mortuary cult that served under Nagash and were sympathetic to him and either thought he was doing the right thing, or because he would lavish them with gifts and rewards for being loyal, they would stay loyal to him, or he would make promises to them that would make them want to follow him. And there were many Tomb Kings and Tomb Princes that lived and died during Nagash's reign that would be loyal to Nagash. Archon the Black is not like this random loner weirdo that likes Nagash and therefore he doesn't fit in the Tomb King faction. He is the leader of the Tomb King Nagash loyalists. But there are Nagash loyalists among the Tomb Kings. Like, there are Tomb Princes, Tomb Kings, and Lich Priests who would flock to the banner of Archon the Black because they think Nagash was right. They think that the gods of Nehekara were weak, and the Day of Awakening never came. But if anyone was going to be able to pull it off, if anyone was going to be able to do what Cetra demanded and create a perfect utopia ruled over by immortal gods who never die, it's Nagash. Nagash can do it. So the thing is, like, I think some people look at like Archon, they're like, oh, he doesn't make sense because like he's in a faction of people that hate him. No, it's just all the other like big name special characters that hate him. But there are plenty of relatively powerful lords that, I mean, if you read the End Times, book 1 was relatively good. And a major aspect of book 1 is that Cetra is constantly being undermined because there are mortuary cult lich priests and various Tomb Kings and Tomb Princes who willingly follow Nagash, and Nagash uses them as basically spies and inside agents that mess with Cetra's plans in order to basically get behind Cetra's lines and do a whole big thing. But yeah. Let's see. Charles CK. What's up with women at all using magic safer / better? I don't know. That is never explained. We have so many prophecies, so many cults, so many decrees within Warhammer that go out of their way to say that magic in the hands of men is much more dangerous than it is in the hands of women. That there is something about men that inherently makes them untrustworthy with magic. But if women are using magic, that is not the case. And it's never explained why. The closest we ever get are 2 of them, which is that for the Ice Witches, have basically a prophecy that if there is ever a male ice wizard, so a man who can wield ice magic, he will bring about ruin. Like he will basically lead to the death of Kislev, and the destruction of the Ice Court. And then you have Malekith, who obsesses over a prophecy that basically says that some great noble hero of the world is going to be struck down by a man that wields sorcery. And of course, there's the whole thing that like Archaon is a man who wields magic, and Archaon destroys the world. Archaon literally brings the apocalypse, and he's a dude that wields magic. Or if you want to be super technical, Manfred is also a dude that wields magic and debatably in the world. Whoever you want to blame for it. Even though Archaon did like 99% of the work. That being said, whether or not you think that there's a truth behind that is ultimately subjective. But within the setting, it is undeniable that there are many completely different cultures that hold very strongly to the idea that there is something deeply, deeply dangerous with men wielding magic. And that's really interesting. It's just a really interesting piece of lore. Obviously, not every culture adheres to it. Like, I mean, you look over at Grand Cathay. Grand Cathay doesn't listen to that. They don't care. Um, their first big bad wizard is literally the Celestial Dragon Emperor himself, and he teaches men and women. He doesn't care. But Kislev has always been very anti-male wizard. The hags do not allow for male wizards. The ice witches do not allow for male wizards. Bretonia does not allow for male wizards. The dark elves now don't allow for male wizards. I mean, they exist. There are dark elf sorcerers that are men, but they're illegal and they have to hide. Yeah, it's really interesting. Let's see. 1.21 gigawin. Some Warhammer Magic uses don't need speech, such as sword dancing, Cancer from Archives 3, and implied uses of channelings to achieve effects. Are there other known non-linguistic magical uses or traditions? So, using forms of magic does not always require speech. So, like, almost all magic items do not require you to say anything. Even many magic items that cast spells, like bound spells, do not require you to say anything. Generally speaking, the way it's supposed to work is that spell casting, especially like powerful spells, is supposed to require speech. Now, I would bet you're always going to find examples where that's not necessarily the case, where people are able to cast non-verbally. But that is the general rule of thumb. But it's also really messy, to put it really frank. This is something that, like, a good example of this, in my opinion, is that when you're dealing with like the Slaanesh, there's a lot of notes about the Slaanesh Mage Priests where the way that they cast magic is often non-verbal, or if it is verbal, it's not speech. It's they make like they basically speak Hysorian, but it's often like these great croaks or frog-like noises. But a lot of the time when you're reading like the actual descriptions of the Slaanesh, there are times where the Slaanesh seem to be capable of utilizing magic without actually expressing themselves verbally, which does seem to imply that there are some forms of magic that can be crafted or controlled without needing to speak, which flies in the face of the standard laws of magic. Because, like, if you're looking at the universe from a broad perspective, right, from like a very zoomed out perspective, and you look at how does casting magic work, the answer is you have to talk. You have to talk, like, period. No exceptions. But then when you start zooming in, you start to find exceptions. So what I would suggest is that there are ways to craft ritual magic, or basically pre-preparing spells that can be mostly cast in advance, but perhaps there's a trigger that's nonverbal, or that suitably powerful wizards can sort of find a way around it. But I would not say that it's terribly well detailed. A lot of the times, though, it's usually that there is some sort of magically crafted weapon or physical item or material that's being used that somehow supplements or stands in for a part of the spellcasting process, but it's only for spell casting. There are many different forms of magic, and many forms of magic do not require speech. Spell casting is said to require speech, but even there, I can think of exceptions. But when it comes to just using forms of magic, there is a silly amount of forms of magic that do not require speech. Many of which, though, it still takes an artistic form. So it's usually stuff like dancing or painting or writing or like smithing. Like there's still some form of artistry often to the process, like a creative outlet. Charles K, despite not being playable, do regular orcs and goblins exist in Age of Sigmar? Yes. Yes, they do. Or they're only extremes like Gits and Ironjaws. Should they be playable if they do? Yes, they do exist. They're not talked about very often, which is really frustrating. But if you actually read like the Auric Warclans book, or you read the Gloomspite Gits book, you will find all sorts of examples of them being like, oh, the Cruel Boys and the Ironjaws are these really weird but really dangerous subgroups within Auric culture. But there are many Aurics that are much smaller than Ironjaws and aren't as lanky and weird as the Cruel Boys, which only live in like swamps or like swamp-like places. There are massive hordes of greenskins that do not look like them because they're just regular orcs and goblins. But GW's going through a really weird thing right now where they don't want you to be able to use your fantasy stuff in AOS, and they don't want you to be able to use your AOS stuff in fantasy. But the lore guys don't care. The guys that are like writing the lore don't give a shit, and they will like write about things that are in the setting that you can't play as, because the guys that actually decide the rules are like, no, we can't let them use their toys for multiple games because that would be evil, apparently. So should they be playable? Yes. Do I think they'll be playable anytime soon? I really doubt it. Bernard, humans across the Warhammer world are built very differently. From the folks of the Empire to the roided out folks of the Chaos Waste of Norska, on a scale, where are Bretonnian nobles? They're big. Most Bretonnian nobles are very carefully bred from a long line of warriors. So the original Bretonnia people are said to have developed a unique cultural divide where the largest, strongest people among their folk would basically be given the most food, the best equipment, and all this other stuff in exchange for, and not have to work the fields or do any hard labor and like do any of that crap in exchange for being the warriors. So they protected everybody else. So they got the best stuff, but they also had to lay their lives on the line constantly, and they were probably going to die horribly in battle. Over thousands of years, those individuals eventually became a higher class as like a sort of caste system developed, and they only bred among themselves for the most part. Obviously a lot of lords and ladies are going to have bastard children because they see a really good looking peasant and they decide to have sex with them. And there are some stories like, with old Bertrand the Brigand and stuff, where you have a noble person that falls in love with a peasant and they basically marry them and bring them up to nobility. But for the most part, you're dealing with like a class of people who are the absolute creme de la creme of the Bretonnian bloodline. It's kind of like eugenics, but like it was sort of like not intentional in a fucked up way, but was more like an accident based on, holy shit, how are we going to hold off like hordes of beastmen and greenskins until it eventually evolved into like a class system where if you look at a Bretonnian noble next to a Bretonnian peasant, they almost look like they're two different breeds of human because they're that different. But many Bretonnian nobles are said to be quite a bit larger and more muscular. Like they're just physically more imposing than your average human. They're large, powerful, big folks. Yeah. Corvus Gang. I don't know if you know this, but why were the Beastmen removed from Age of Sigmar? Because they were put into Old World. That's the answer. I know it sucks. I hate it. But basically, they wanted to have the Beastmen range in Old World. Age of Sigmar was building up a major narrative for the Beastmen revolving around Morgr. And I guess a decision was reached where they decided to give the Beastmen to the Old World team And when they did that, the Age of Sigmar team seemingly were told that they weren't allowed to use Beastmen anymore because they didn't have two separate ranges for them. They only had one range. So they had to be in either AOS or Old World, and Old World got them. It's kind of like how at the time there's only like the regular Skaven range, and there was only the regular vampire count range. And so they got given to AOS, and you're not allowed to use them in fantasy. And it's not because the Skaven and vampire counts aren't relevant. That's not how that works. They're always relevant. But basically GW is trying to separate them, which is really frustrating. From Eggman, Marathi OnlyFans would drive Pinkerus no work into crippling debt. Also, how long did Nakari take to hunt down most of Venarian's descendants? Oh god, this one is kind of a sad thing because this is one of the things I think me and Andy would disagree very heavily about, is that I personally really prefer the 8th edition storyline or 7th edition storyline, I think, that was given to Nakari, which allowed Nakari to actually be really, really scary and have a really big win, which basically says that Nakari goes on a rampage after he returns the first time, after he escapes out of the vortex. Nakari basically goes on a rampage for like, it's not super long. I think it's like a decade, where he basically attacks and kills almost all of the heirs of Venarian. So, and it basically builds up this storyline where Nakari starts manifesting in places around the world, but especially in Ulthuan, where he starts just tracking down every descendant of Venarian and murdering them. And Andy's version of Warhammer has there being a rather staggering number of the heirs of Venarian kicking around. Like there's just a ton of them. But in Andy's defense, and why Andy is much more likely right and the Demons book is just wrong, is that whoever wrote the Demons book did not consider the fact that there are likely a stupid amount of heirs of Venarian kicking around, and being an heir of Venarian is actually not really that rare or a big of a deal because all of the fucking Everqueens are heirs of Venarian. They are. And we talked about this in the Everqueen episode. GW legitimately just forgot that that's the case, which is really annoying. Like if you look at 7th and 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy, well, probably any edition of Warhammer Fantasy, to be fair, most of them, when you read them, are written to suggest that the only major heirs of Venarian that are still alive are Tyrion, Teclis, and Malekith. And that's it. But Alariel is right there. Like, Alariel is right there. But the GW seems to have genuinely forgotten that Alariel is an heir of Venarian. So, granted, I think in standard Lorebeards fashion, you can easily massage these stories together. So simply have it where, okay, like there are still a good number, like there's a few dozen heirs of Venarian still alive, but maybe Nakari brought it from there being like 1,000 of them down to there being like 50 of them, which would still be deeply impressive and would still show like the terrifying, over-the-top, obsessive nature of Nakari, where he literally is manifesting in the strangest places in the world, showing up, attacking places with these demonic legions, but he seems to go after one particular elf, and after he grabs that elf and drags them screaming back into the realm of chaos, he vanishes and abandons his army, which then like discorporates and everything. And that would make for a really cool book, actually, because you could have like a murder mystery type of story where Nakari is basically showing up and attacking, which is basically the story of Tyrion and Teclis's children. Is that literally Nakari is running around assassinating all of these different elves. And everyone's struggling to figure out why he's doing it or like what the pattern is. They're really having a hard time figuring out the pattern. And then the pattern ends up being that he's killing all the heirs of an Aryan. And so the High Elves deduce that eventually he's going to come for Tyrion and Teclis because they are heirs of an Aryan. So they take Tyrion and Teclis to the Temple of Assurin to protect them. And that's where Nakari attacks. And Nakari wins basically until he's too busy playing with his food and trying to torture Tyrion, and Teclis hits him with a little bolt of magic, and he accidentally moves one of his arms through the flame of Assurin, and that gives Assurin the chance to just obliterate him. Yeah. And if you're going to do it that way, which I think would be great, I'd say it'd be reasonable for it to take Nakari like 100 years or so. But it'd make a really cool book from Nakari's perspective. Or like, that would be a really cool book where you have like a bunch of different elven perspectives. So you show like the sea elves, the elves of Marienburg, the wood elves, the Larlorn elves, the dark elves, the outcast dark elves of Nagaroth, and the shades, basically the shade clans, and the elves of Ulthuan. And you show all of them being attacked by Nakari, and like this unique, you could show all these unique different elven perspectives of them all trying to figure out what is Nakari doing, which could be interesting. I thought I answered this one, but all of them. Yeah. The Skaven slaves would almost assuredly die of like heart palpitations and horny excitement just by seeing Morathi. Pancake Away, thoughts on the Wolfram 5th edition announcement? I want to be optimistic. I think a 5th edition is a little weird. To me, it feels like it should be more like a 4.5. I had heard they were working on a 4.5, and now they've come out and they're like, oh, it's a 5th edition, which to me kind of feels like they're taking their 4.5 and they're just calling it 5th edition. But based on what they've said, it's supposed to be backwards compatible. So it's supposed to work with all of the 4th edition books. And they're also using a lot of the same systems. But they're also, I'm going to say it, they're also kind of stealing some of Andy's ideas. Where like they're rolling in fate and fortune with resilience and resolve to make them one system, which is a LAWhammer thing. So they're just getting rid of resolve and resilience, it seems like. But they're also like, to me, it kind of feels like a 4.5, but for marketing reasons, they're calling it a 5.0. But either way, I really hope it's good. But I have been kind of disappointed by several of the recent books. Not all of them. I thought Wardens of Kothic was really good. I thought that Lords of Stone and Steel was much better than the Dwarf Player's Handbook, or the Dwarf Player's Guide Handbook. But I thought both the Dwarf Player's Guide Handbook and the High Elf Player's Guide Handbooks were both concerning. The editing aspect of them, I was not very impressed with. So I really, really, really hope that they're gonna invest in some good editing and some good formatting, because some of the recent books have been a little concerning. But I still enjoy them. Like on a 10-point scale, I'd still give them like a 7 out of 10. The Dwarf Player's Guide, I'd probably give like a 5 or a 4 out of 10. I really didn't like that book. That book had a lot of problems. But the High Elf Player's Guide was more like a 6.5, 7 out of 10. But like I thought Lords of Stone and Steel was like a 7.5 out of 10. And Wardens of Kothic was like a nice 8.5, 9. I really enjoyed Wardens of Kothic. So I hope for the best. Catholic Skaven would worship cheese's crust. Yes, they would. Yes, they absolutely would. From Eggman, it's kind of funny reading up on Aztec mythology. I learned that Tetzala, oh man, I used to be able to say this. Tetzcatlipoca. There we go. Tetzcatlipoca is like a fusion of Corn and Zinch. Yes, some of the Aztec mythologies are like, whew, they're like really dark, and terrifying, like super fucking terrifying. Adding to the editing worries, the most recent Soulbound Champs of Chaos book was really bad. Yeah, I don't know, like, I'll put it this way. If you open the front pages of the recent Cubicle 7 books, the editors for those books are also the writers for those books, and that's a no-no. That's a big no-no. You can't edit your own writing. You can't. That's not how editing works. Like, it should be proofread by a different person, and it should be edited by a different person. And like, the Dwarf Player's Hand Guide is a perfect example. If you crack open that book and look at who the editors and the writers are, it's the same people. And to me, that is deeply troubling. That should not be the case. That should absolutely not be the case. Wibblewolf, do you think the new Marauders from Old World are going to be put in as a cosmic update for Norska in the DLC? No. God, no. Also, Norska bolt throwers on mammoths. Technologically, that should be a thing. Bolt throwers are not that complex. And the idea of Norskins creating siege weapons that hurl big old bolts is not that odd. I would say that Norskin ranges traditionally do not have bolt throwers. So that should mean, unfortunately, that the mammoths also should not have bolt throwers, because Norskins just don't use siege weapons. Traditionally. They just don't. They use big scary monsters, and if you have walls, they build ladders and siege towers, but they don't seem to ever use siege equipment, at least for the battle game. So unfortunately, I would say that is not, I don't think that would ever happen, because it would not fit the faction's aesthetic. From a in-universe perspective and from like a lore perspective, I think it is completely reasonable that the Norskins who are riding on top of like a 100-foot tall fucking mammoth would realize that they cannot get into melee combat. So they need to use weapons that have range in order to actually be able to hurt people from those giant fighting platforms that they're riding. So they should have like javelins, throwing axes, bolt throwers, like very crude but functional bolt throwers. And like maybe like grappling hook type things. You know, I think all of those would be very, very reasonable weapons for them. Like, you know, harpoons would be cool. I don't know why they don't, because like they're not going to be able to hit anything from up there. I don't care how long your spear is. You can't hit anything from the top of a mammoth. You've got to be able to throw something at least. But yeah. Jack Ruby, what would Nurgle think of Echoed Hellbrass? Nurgle would probably like him more than most of Zinch's servants, but I think he would also dislike him still. Because what Echoed Hellbrass leaves behind him is mutinous change, but it does not, the path of life that Echoed Hellbrass tracks behind him does not follow the cycle of Nurgle. The path of Echoed Hellbrass is said to be like, you can tell where he's passed because that weird, strange life sprouts in his wake and follows him wherever he goes. But it's not like it's a natural cycle where like these flowers then release pollen and they mate with one another, and then the pollen drops the seeds, which propagates new flowers, and then the old flowers decay. It's like an unwholesome, weird form of magical life that springs up and just stays there, because it's a testament to the passing of Echoed. He's not just creating random life. It's literally a look. Hellbrass has passed this way. Behold the journey he has taken. So I think Nurgle would be deeply irritated by the fact that it is not um the form of life that he appreciates. It is not life that begets more life. It is not life that rots and decays to give birth to something worse and bigger and nastier. It is stagnant in a way. It is something that props up and marks the passing of someone, as opposed to being something that spreads and alters and grows. So I don't think you would actually like him that much. Leo Zhang, are Tomb Kings order tied? It seems like Warhammer 3 implies it is. No, they are not. The Tomb Kings are neutral. They're not on anybody's side. They're on their own side. And even then, they're not really on their own side because they hate each other. A lot of them do. The way it works in Total War is that the Tomb Kings AI actually has a unique gimmick, which is that the Tomb Kings like whoever is the most powerful. The more powerful you are, the more likely the Tomb Kings are going to want to be friends with you, which is reversed from the way most of the AI works. When you're looking at the AI diplomacy in Total War, most factions in the game, if you are very, very powerful, it causes your diplomacy to be negative with them because they see you as a threat. So the more powerful you are, the lower your base diplomacy is with that faction. The Tomb Kings are the only faction in the game where that is the opposite. The more powerful you are, the more likely the Tomb Kings are to like you at base because they're like impressed by your power. Whereas the weaker you are, the more likely the Tomb Kings are to hate you at base because you're just annoying to them. So if your campaign ends up having an order tide, so the forces of order are doing very well and they're getting really powerful, the Tomb Kings are more likely to ally with them because they're powerful. But the flip side to that is that, yes, the Tomb Kings are more likely to join with the forces of order because the forces of destruction in Total War tend to be more aggressive. So, like, if Scarbrand is doing really well, or Malagor is doing really well, Malagor never does really well, but if he was doing really well, they would be more likely to attack the Tomb Kings because they're going to be aggressive. That being said, in a good amount of my campaigns, it's not unusual to see the Skaven teamed up with the Tomb Kings. So, like, Clan Moors in a lot of my campaigns will ally with the Tomb Kings. I've had campaigns where Kairos will ally with the Tomb Kings, though that one's not as likely. It can happen, but it's more rare. But like Scarbrand never allies with them. It's pretty rare that the Greenskins ally with them. They never tend to ally with Manfred. But it's kind of a weird thing where, like, it's more likely they're to ally with the good guys because the good guys are less likely to be aggressive towards them. And also, if the good guys tend to be really powerful, they're more likely to be, their AI is more interested in forming an alliance. Whereas if an evil faction is more powerful, their AI tends to be more likely to be aggressive. So it's kind of like a weird set of circumstances that kind of lead the game to leaning that direction. But I will say it is not unusual in most of my playthroughs to see like Tomb Kings, Skaven, and Ogres forming a big super alliance down in the Badlands. Professor Shap. Speaking of wizards, I've been wondering what type of magic system is in Araby. Is there any detail on it? Like, do we know how they arrange their magical groups when compared to the Empire? Do they have their own colleges of magic? Do the Arabians have their own, or Arabians actually, have their own college of magic? Not that I'm aware of. No. They have several different kinds of wizards. Many of whom have on apprentices and such. But their form of magic tends to rely very heavily on working with spirits, elemental spirits especially. So magic, for whatever reason, magic, especially before the coming of Nagash, was said to be very rare in that part of the world. Like, there was something about the that northern chunk of the Southlands that like repelled the winds of magic, or magic just did not seem to flow there very well. Now, when Nagash built his Black Pyramid, that all changed rather dramatically. But the Arabians and the Nehakarans were noted to struggle at using large quantities of magic until post Black Pyramid. But in a post Black Pyramid world, the Arabians are noted for being masters of capturing elemental spirits, which they refer to with names like Ifrits, Jinns, sea nymphs, genies, and basically they are these powerful, they're demons functionally, or etheric entities that the Arabians capture in like urns or magic lamps, and urns and all this other stuff, that they are bound with all of these runes that basically bind them to the control of the sorcerer in question. And then the wizard or sorcerer will basically break that, whatever they're sealed in, and unleash them upon the enemy. Where basically they'll unleash them and say something along the lines of like, go destroy my enemies and you're free. And they'll like go off and do crazy shit. That being said, the magic of Araby is said to revolve pretty strongly about certain lores of magic. Notably, the lore of light is said to be very, very strong down in Araby, and shows up like in larger concentrations than it does in other parts of the world. You also have the lore of fire. Akshi is very, very powerful down there. And the lore of life, Gyran, because of the ocean over there, where all like the sea nuts and everything come from. But their culture seems to work much more heavily on a concept of wizards are people that discover that they have the gift of the winds of magic, and they take an apprenticeship with various sorcerers within their communities, who then pass down the knowledge that they've acquired. But the Arabians are also said to be, I keep saying Arabians, Arabians are said to be some of the most gifted crafters of like magical items in the world. Like they make insanely powerful magical items. The craftsmanship of Arabian magic items is staggering compared to what you will find in other parts of the world, which is really, really interesting and unique. Where you have things like the Arabian puzzle box, or the casket of what is it called? It's like the casket of magic, I think. But Araby has an incredibly powerful magic tradition, much of which comes from the fact that they learn their magic at the feet of spirits and demons that they would capture and force to tell them the secrets of magic in exchange for like that entity's freedom or whatever. They also learned a lot due to Neherkaran culture and secrets that they stole or were passed down to them from the mortuary cult. They learned a lot from their gods, and they also learned a considerable amount from Tzeentch as well, because Tzeentch actually possessed a sorcerer that created to put in perspective how absolutely bonkers fucking crazy these guys are. There was once an Arabian sorcerer who created a magical mirror that was so powerful that it opened a gateway to the crystal labyrinth of Tzeentch. Now, he was partially inspired by a greater demon of Tzeentch that tricked him. And when he completed the mirror, it possessed him. I think they swapped. So like his soul got ejected into the mirror and he got lost in the crystal labyrinth. And the greater demon of Tzeentch possessed his body. And he went on to influence the future of sorcery within Araby and made sorcery significantly more powerful in Araby by teaching them many of the deepest secrets of especially Dar and dark sorcery. Which he did it as a form to corrupt Araby, to make people more likely to fall into cults of Tzeentch or fall to the corrupting influence of wielding the more disastrous forms of unprotected magics, But the side effect was that it also just made sorcery there just way more powerful in general. Yes, that's what it was. Aldred's Casket of Sorcery. Thank you. Manixar, is resurrection magic common outside lore vampires? No. How does a revivification crystal, the one that Bastildons carry around, work? Rev crystals. So the revivification crystal from Total War was a complete invention of Total War. It does not exist outside of Total War Warhammer, though in my opinion it should, because it's such a fucking cool concept. But basically what a revivification crystal is that it is the crystallized essence of the magic that powers the spawning pools of the lizardmen. And what's basically revealed is that the spawning pools are these great pools of jade magic. That the spawning pools are gushing in Gyran. And so these crystals are the crystallized essence of Gyran functionally. And what it is that when the skink on the back of the Bastillodon activates the revivification crystal, it pours out the magic that exists within the spawning pools, which causes the lizardmen around the crystal to start regenerating to the point where they're regenerating limbs and their wounds close up and they get up and they like continue fighting. The Rev crystals, to my understanding, if memory serves, I don't believe they actually revivification crystal. Okay, yeah. So the revivification crystal hold on, I'm reading I have to read a little note from the game. Okay, so the revivification crystal canonically does not bring back the dead. It can bring you back from the point of death, but it cannot, once you're dead, you're dead. But it does also note that the revivification crystal of the lizardman is believed to have something to do with Sotek. So what it functionally is your basic, it's from the lizardman's perspective, they are wielding the power of Sotek to give their fellow lizardmen the regenerating properties of snakes, where like they're sloughing off like their old wounds, and like a snake molting off its old skin and coming out fresh and like renewed. The lizardmen are functionally kind of implied to be doing that through the power of the revivification crystal. But it notes when the revivification crystal originally came out, I actually got to have a conversation with Andy. Oh my gosh, the other Andy. Oh my gosh, I can't remember his last name. The head writer, lore writer for Creative Assembly for Warhammer. And basically the idea is that it's the crystallized essence of the spawning pools being used to regenerate the lizardmen, but it cannot actually bring them back from death. If you're dead, you're dead. In Warhammer, there are Andy Hall. Thank you. Yes, Andy Hall. In Warhammer, there are very, 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 very few things that can bring you back from death. They do exist, but they're exceedingly rare. And the lore of vampires doesn't resurrect you. I guess it kind of does, but like you're already dead. It's more of that it puts back the shell that contains your essence back together again. Because vampires, when vampires die, they're unique. Their soul does not go into the ether. Or to the afterlife. Their soul is bound to their mortal remains. So what you're doing when you resurrect a vampire is that you are literally just like repairing their body to the point that they're able to function and operate again. But you're not like dragging them from the afterlife back into reality. That seems to be virtually impossible. Me and Andy have done a stream. I don't remember which stream it was now, but we've done a stream where we talk about the essence of necromancy and how necromancy might not actually be what it appears to be on the surface, where it could be that necromancy doesn't actually resurrect anybody, but instead it's more like creating an echo of them. But it's really hard to say. Let's see. So yeah, hopefully it answers that. You're Picasso, Larry. Thank you, Hammond. I don't know what that's in reference to. Donoman. So generally speaking, in the Warhammer world, can people who are mute or struggle to speak verbally due to disabilities cast spells? Generally speaking, no. If you're mute, you cannot cast magic. If you struggle to speak verbally, you should not cast magic, because a lot of the times what a miscast is, so when a wizard miscasts, it's because they stumbled while speaking. So like if you're shouting out a spell and you mispronounce one of the words for the spell, or if you stutter, or if you bite your tongue and you're like, ugh, for a second, if you don't say the full thing properly, it causes the magic to completely fuck up. And because when you're casting a spell, you are drawing the winds of magic to you, and then you're shaping them using the spoken word, and then the spoken word is giving a form to the reality changing energy you're wielding, that when you finish the command that you're speaking in the language of magic, you're basically like almost speaking a command into existence that you then basically unleash, right? So if you stumble over what you're saying, it will cause the magic to do something that you did not intend, which most likely is going to result in you having to, the wizard realizing what's happened. And at that moment, they will attempt to ground the magic so that it dissipates harmlessly into the ground, or they will otherwise attempt to flail, basically, because what they're holding and the magic that they're drawing in has now suddenly been giving a command for something they didn't intend, and it's going to cause the magic to do something really fucking weird, and it's also now distracted them. So the magic that they're controlling is probably going to slip out of their control and explode, or they're going to explode, or it's going to cause them to be possessed by a demon, or they're accidentally going to rip open a very brief but notable gateway to the realm of chaos, and a demon's going to reach out and grab them and pull them back in, or the winds of magic are going to like suddenly deaden because like the spell they were casting, the way they mispronounced, causes like the winds to repel and magic just deadens and they can't cast anything for a moment, or it causes like a part of their brain, like a part of their soul basically, to get destroyed and they just completely forget how to cast spells anymore. It can cause all sorts of weird shit to happen. John Tenney, Loremaster, how would you implement End and Koresh in Total War Warhammer 3? What specific things would need to happen before they're implemented? I would implement them as fully playable factions. Fully playable new races. That would be super fucking awesome. That requires two things to happen. No, three things to happen. Number one, Games Workshop has to make them. In a perfect world, Games Workshop would realize how successful Cathay was, and part of the great success of Cathay was that they worked hand in hand with Creative Assembly. So in a perfect world, Games Workshop would reapproach Creative Assembly and ask if they would want to partner once again to make Koresh an End. I will tell you that is not going to happen. And this is going to be harsh, but I'm going to be honest that I think because the old world is out again, and it's relatively successful, Games Workshop will be very much in the mindset that they do not need Creative Assembly, that they do not need their help. And why would they share their cake with them if they don't have to? Is number one. Number two is that the only reason Games Workshop would develop Enden Koresh at this point right now, because Games Workshop is ultimately a fairly greedy company that does not care about their IP. They care about making as much money as possible, which are two different things. What I mean by that, I don't mean like they hate their IP. I mean that if they prioritize their IP above all else, they would develop their IP to be as solid and well researched and explored as possible. That's not what Games Workshop cares about. What Games Workshop does care about is selling miniatures. They want to sell you plastic minis. Your toys for the war game. Working with Creative Assembly to make a faction for Total War does not, at this moment or at any soon time, help them in any way, shape, or form at making plastic toys. So they're not going to do that. They're not going to do that again. They did that to build up hype for the old world coming out, but I don't think they're going to do it again. So if GW is going to make them, that means they need to make them for the old world. They need to make them for Warhammer the Old World. And so that's fine. In fact, there are very strong, persistent rumors going around, rumors that I personally deeply believe, because the people I have heard them from, I believe to be very trustworthy sources, have talked about that they are currently, as we speak, making both of these factions. I've even heard that Koresh End is done, like completely done for the old world, like development wise. If any of that is true, which it might not be, but if any of it is true, the second thing that would need to happen is that Games Workshop would have to give the green light for Total War Warhammer to use old world material. And I can tell you for a fact, this is not an opinion, this is a fact, that I've heard from Games Workshop's own lips, like employees, at the headquarters, not at my local GW store, at Warhammer World, employees, that old world cannot be used in Total War Warhammer right now. Or at least that was the case 6 months ago. Those are seen as completely different IPs. And Total War does not own a old world license. They have a Warhammer Fantasy license. They do not have a Warhammer the Old World license. And as far as GW is concerned, those are two different licenses. So either Creative Assembly would have to hawk up the cash, or convince Sega to hawk up the cash to go to Games Workshop and purchase the old world IP rights, or Games Workshop would have to basically give the old world IP rights for free to Creative Assembly, which I think they should, because the old world would not exist without Creative Assembly. Creative Assembly contributed significantly more to the old world coming to life than GW did. GW abandoned Warhammer Fantasy and had zero interest in ever returning. That is a fact. That's not an opinion. That's a fact. Games Workshop blew it up. They had no interest in salvaging it. As far as they were concerned, it was a dead IP. But Total War Warhammer and Vermintide should also get its fair credit. But Total War Warhammer did a lot of the lion's share. I would give them 90% credit to resurrecting Warhammer Fantasy and bringing us the old world. And I think there is something deeply problematic and grotesque about GW treating them like it's a completely different IP, and that old world or Total War should not be allowed to use things that would make sense for the era that Total War Warhammer is based in. Like, I'm not saying that like Total War Warhammer should have like Friedel the Chainmaker as a legendary lord. No, she's not around in the era of Karl Franz. She's an old world specific character. I think it's perfectly fine for her to stay in the old world. But like the Necrolith Bone Dragon for the Tomb Kings, that should be in Total War Warhammer. There's no reason that should not be in Total War Warhammer. In the modern era, the Necrolith Bone Dragons would still be around. The Foot Knights of Bretonnia, the Knights of the Realm on Foot, should be in Total War Warhammer. There is no reason that over the last 200 years, the Knights of Bretonnia suddenly were like, nope, can't fight on foot. That's impossible. Completely impossible. Can't be done. That was a merely a few hundred years ago thing. So until those two things happen, Indent Koresh will never be in Total War Warhammer. Never. It won't happen. So those two things have to happen. So the third thing that would need to happen is that there would need to be a very large community push, a very consistent, long-term community push by lots of people emailing, writing in physical letters to Games Workshop's head studio, asking them to put Old World in Total War Warhammer. It would need content creators doing a constant campaign to get Old World stuff into Total War Warhammer. Like, you would have to like take all of the fury that the Total War community manifests over bugs and aim it towards GW, which I don't know if that's possible at this point. But maybe it is. I don't know. It's one of those things I want to make a movie about next year. Why wouldn't CA just buy the dang license? Because it costs money. And if CA wants to spend money, they have to convince Sega to let them spend that money because they're a subsidiary of Sega. They can't just do it. Sega would have to be involved. And I can't imagine the conversation would go that well with Sega of Japan being like, why are you buying a license to a thing you already own? And also that license is not going to be cheap. This isn't like GW being like, oh, we're gonna like sell you this for nickels on the dime. Like, as far as GW goes, probably concerned, Old World is a very competitive license that they can make a lot of money off of selling. So we'll have to see. Anyway, Diamond, Norskid should tie multiple spears together to make a super spear specific for Mammoth Riders. Hilarious, sure, why not? Eric Larson had a strange TTRPG campaign with the Realm of Chaos time fuckery. Would it be possible to time travel between the old world and Age of Sigmar? Yep. Go read. There's a Gotrek book called Gotrek Blood of the Old World. Go read it, and you can literally see how this would work. Go read it. Current Shima, the Chaos Gods are creations of the Old Ones. When they tried to create sentient beings in the ether, it was a complete disaster. So the Old Ones knew better, and then only tried to create lives in the material world, trying to rectify their mistakes. Yeah, you could do that as a headcanon. There's a note in the written material. There's a note in the written material that there were things far older than the Old Ones possibly comprehended within the ether. So that you'd kind of have to massage that a bit. But you know, if you wanted to make that thing, you absolutely could. Dumb fair enough as an answer. However, follow up, I do think there should have been another general undead non-vampire faction. I agree. 100% agree. Diamond, you've mentioned before that unlike 40k, magic and fantasy is not the direct power of the ether, but basically the physical effects of what the ether interacts with reality, in which case, what are demons actually made of when they enter the material realm? Are they basically similar warp stone like solidified magic? Are they somehow made of pure etheric stuff? Are they etheric energy caused by physical body? Okay, so when there's actually some interesting stuff about this in the Liber Necris, but demons that manifest into reality go from being etheric beings to physical beings. So, like, when a demon manifests, it has to obey the laws of reality. And the laws of reality declare that the demon must have a body. It has to have a body. So the demons will manifest for themselves a physical body, where they have flesh, they have bones, they have guts, they have blood, they have organs. So like if you run up and you stab a demon in the stomach and rip your lance back or whatever it is, you will see its entrails and things that the subconscious of the sapient beings of Warhammer think the inside of a demon should look like are going to look like before the whole creature's body basically breaks down and dissolves away into nothing. Demons, when they manifest, they're physical things. But it's kind of like, how do I explain this? It's like they're a bubble. So like when a demon, which is this bizarre energy thing, creature, entity that does not have a physical body, tries to come to reality, it is able to manifest itself a bubble of physical flesh that is made out of etheric energy. Kind of like how when you cast a spell, you're taking the functionally invisible winds of magic, which is just a form of energy, and you are using a spell to craft it into having a physically tangible effect. So you're taking in this wind of fire, the wind of Akshi, that to most people is invisible, and you craft it into a fireball that you throw that obeys the laws of reality, which, I mean, the wind of Akshi also obeys its own laws now that it's in reality, but you reshape it into a physical thing being that is visible to everyone, which is a big fucking fireball that you throw, and it generates heat and it burns people, and it works along certain logistical rules. When a demon manifests, you are basically seeing a creature that is you could debate has cast for itself a physical body that obeys certain rules. Where if it doesn't have wings, it cannot fly. If it is breathing, it can drown. Despite the fact that it is an immortal, genuinely unkillable thing, it can be killed. By killed, of course, we mean that its physical body deteriorates and it's ejected back to the ether. So it's a mess, and it's not something that's super well defined. But that kind of would be the way that I would explain it. But like demons, most of them, when they're in reality, demons have biological functions. Like they don't need to per se, but they have a concept of hunger. They have a concept of touch. They have a concept of taste. They will eat people. They will eat food. They will indulge in all of the various new sensations that they have because they don't have those things in the ether. The ether is not a place of matter or time. It is separate from that, which is super fucking weird. Unless you have a being from reality who is in the realm of chaos, in which case he debatably, through his perception, his horror there, through their perception of the ether, is grounding the ether in a form of reality, by giving it concepts that allow their brains to perceive what they're witnessing. But it's super fucking weird. It's super fucking weird. Let's see. Wolf. Any other rumors you've heard? So I have heard I would take this part with a grain of salt. The Koresh and In stuff, I believe wholeheartedly, genuinely. As part of that, this one I would caution some severe salt. And also, just because GW has made Ending Koresh doesn't mean it'll ever be put to publish. There are many things that they have created that they've never released. And when they create something, it's sometimes still years away from release. So don't think that's like, oh, Koresh is coming out next year. Probably not. But if the rumors that I have been told are true, which, once again, salt. I have heard that there is going to functionally be something along the lines of an Eastern theater for the old world. So basically, like, they're going to resolve the current storyline that's happening in the old world. So the campaign supplements we're going through right now. Where you have, like, Cetra is invading the Border Princes and trying to get up to Bretonia. And Friedel the Chainmaker and the Norskins have taken over a big chunk of Westerland, but then Grand Cathay showed up and they pushed the Norskins out of Westerland, and now we're about to get a new book that's called The Raising of the Westerland. So, like, shit's happening, right? Supposedly, take this with a lot of salt, supposedly once this edition wraps up, the next edition is going to take us to a new theater of war. And it's either going to be the Western theater, where we're going to go to, like, Nagaroth, Ulthuan, and Lustria, or it's going to be the Eastern theater, which is going to be like End, Koresh, the Hobgoblin Khanate, Grand Cathay, and Nippon. And then whichever one we don't go to, the edition after that will take us to whatever theater we didn't do. So, like, if this rumor is true, which I cannot caution how much salt I would advise for this. If this is true, we would be looking at, like, second edition might be the Eastern theater and the third edition might be the Western theater. Or second edition might be the Western theater and third edition might be the Eastern theater. Where you still have all the playable factions that were established in the first edition, but you would also be getting a bunch of new factions from other places in the world. Potentially even bringing back some of the squatted factions. So, like, Skaven, Ogres, Lizardmen, Dark Elves, Vampire Counts, Demons might all be returning factions in these other theaters. Does GW have a history of playing this far in advance? Yes. GW normally has things planned many years in advance. Like, many, many, many years in advance. Now, stuff changes. So, like, when market things happen, they will adjust and, things will change. But, yeah. If they went west, could we get more details on Northern Lustria? God, I hope so. I care more about Southern Nagaroth than I do Northern Lustria, but I would take either. All right. With that, I think I've pretty much answered all the questions that I've seen. We're all caught up on Super Chats and everything. So I think we're going to go... Oops, sorry. I missed one. Pancake Away. What do you think about the Tomb Queens as a generic lord option for the Tomb Kings in Total War? Give them a bow and a skill tree that buffs range units. I'd be down. That'd be cool. Dude, if we could get Tomb Queens and they just have a different weapon set, I would be elated. Like, let them have, like, a bow and a halberd, or like a bow and a great weapon, or a bow and a flail. I would just like to see different weapon set. It's a little sad that the Tomb King and the Tomb Prince are basically the exact same. I think the Tomb Prince has a halberd and the Tomb King has a regular hand weapon, but they both have shields. I would love for the Tomb Queens to have, like, a big two-handed flail of skulls, and then maybe they also use a bow at range. That would be really cool. I'd love that. That would be hype. That would be super hype. Like, I don't know, if all of the elves can have male and female versions where they wield different equipment, I don't see why the Tomb Kings couldn't, because Tomb Queens are a thing. But anyway, How would I implement gnomes? I would probably put them as part of the Dogs of War for right now. I don't think there's enough there for them to be their own standalone faction. I'd be happy to be wrong on that, though. If they wanted to release like gnomes as a playable faction, I would be elated. I think they'd be super cool. Oh yeah, Crusader Prime. You can look it up. Like, literally, if you just go on Google and look up Warhammer Dwarf Steam Tank, you'll find the information. But there's like some like old concept stuff that it wasn't used, but basically there were concepts that were being considered for making functionally a dwarf steam tank for, I think, 8th edition, as one of their like big minis. I think it was 8th. But they didn't go forward with it. All right. Anyway, I'm gonna bounce. My nose is super stuffed for some reason. I hope you all had fun and really enjoyed yourselves. Hopefully this was like just a fun, cute little AMA thing. I do apologize again that Andy couldn't be with us today. He's just feeling a bit under the weather, but he'll be feeling good again soon. And when he does, we'll be getting back into total lore with witch hunters. Though I will note that we will be doing it at a slightly different time this week. We're still trying to finagle it because I have a thing that I have to go to on Sunday at the usual time. So we're either going to do it on Sunday, but a couple hours earlier. So we'll start a couple of hours earlier than we normally do. Or it might be like much later on Sunday, or it might be like sometime on Saturday. I don't know. But it's going to have to move, unfortunately. But we will see you all for the Witch Hunter episodes here soon. If you're not tired of my face yet, and you want to see me playing a spooky horror game, I will let you all know that I will be coming back in roughly an hour to play some Silent Hill 2 to celebrate October, spooky month. I have never played a horror game in my life, so this is the first time I have played a horror game, and it's also the first time I played a horror game on stream. We got a pretty good way into the game yesterday, so we're going to be continuing with that. But I've got to like take a shower and eat some more food and some other stuff because I've been busy today. But I hope you all had fun, and we will see you all soon. Thank you very much for watching. Please take care. Please send Andy your good vibes and healing energy. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.